The political landscape in Iran has entered a new phase of instability. Defections within the regime's forces, persistent protests despite internet blockades, and American military movements in the Middle East are reshaping the regional dynamic. For those observing from the outside, especially in the United States, this issue matters because it influences global energy security, the stability of strategic routes, and the balance of power between Washington, Tehran, Tel Aviv, and major powers. Understanding what is happening now helps to comprehend how these events could evolve into containment, a prolonged crisis, or even military escalation. In this video, we will organize the most recent facts, explain what is behind the defections, how the Iranian population is reacting, why the United States has reinforced its presence in the region, and what all this means from a geopolitical point of view. If you value serious and straightforward analysis of what's really happening in the world, please like and subscribe to the channel. This greatly strengthens the channel and helps me bring content that doesn't usually appear in traditional media. Also, let us know where you're watching from. Now let's understand this whole situation. Over the past few years, Iran has experienced episodes of popular protest that revealed deep tensions between society and the state. These episodes gained momentum especially after cases of repression against women and young people, who became symbols of accumulated social discontent. The protests, spread across various cities and regions, do not follow a single sociological profile. They involve students, workers, ethnic minorities, and even traditionally more conservative sectors, signaling that discontent is not restricted to a specific group. Faced with these mobilizations, the state has resorted to control methods that include arrests, physical violence, and intensified police presence, with the aim of reducing the circulation of information and delaying international repercussions. The authorities have applied severe restrictions to internet connectivity, hindering the transmission of videos, photos, and real-time reports. This blockade creates a narrative contrast. While some official vehicles and media aligned with the government claim that the situation has been contained and that people have returned home, several diaspora organizations, independent journalists, and analysts covering the region report the continuation of the demonstrations, albeit on a smaller and more fragmented scale. From a geopolitical perspective, information control becomes a strategic tool, as it allows the regime to shape external and internal perceptions of stability, legitimacy, and the ability to govern. This dynamic is not unique to Iran, and has been observed in other authoritarian regimes that, by limiting the flow of data, seek to gain diplomatic time and reduce political costs. For the American public, understanding this struggle for narrative control helps to comprehend how local crises can be interpreted differently by governments, societies, and international media. If you have been following this analysis so far, please comment with the word context to support the channel and strengthen this community interested in geopolitics. Behind this social instability emerges another important element: signs of fragmentation within the Iranian power system itself. There are reports that members of the security forces and specific military structures, such as the Revolutionary Guard, have shown resistance to following certain orders related to domestic repression. In some cases mentioned by human rights organizations and independent media outlets, individuals who refused to carry out certain actions were punished in an exemplary manner, even facing capital sentences. This type of measure functions as an internal deterrent and reinforces the message that the state will not tolerate fissures in its coercive foundations. For experts in political science and international security, the cohesion of the security forces is the main pillar of authoritarian regimes. When desertions, refusals, and internal conflicts arise, the very core of power is called into question. There are also records that civilian officials, including names associated with the Ministry of the Interior, have abandoned their posts and openly advocated for structural changes in the country. This aspect is noteworthy because it indicates that the signs of strain are not only in the armed sectors, but also in the administrative bureaucracy, which plays an important role in maintaining the daily functioning of the state. When bureaucracy loses motivation, loyalty, or alignment, its governance capacity diminishes, impacting services, internal decisions, and external credibility. For the American public, this situation is relevant because it destabilizes a regional actor that already has a history of friction with the United States, especially on issues related to the Persian Gulf. the Strait of Hormuz, and the security of historical allies in the region. With the partial weakening of internal trust, reports are beginning to emerge about the presence of foreign fighters supporting the regime. In the language of international relations, the term proxies usually designates groups that act on behalf of a state, generally outside its borders with ideological, military, or financial ties. In the Iranian case, observers claim that fighters from countries such as Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan have been mobilized to reinforce security in strategic urban centers, such as Tehran, Mashhad, and other important cities. The reasoning behind this strategy can be understood as follows. If some Iranian agents hesitate to repress their own population, foreign fighters may be less sensitive to the political and social impact of this task. There are also reports of direct confrontations between civilians in these groups, including ambushes and the seizure of vehicles, which highlights a highly volatile and decentralized environment. The use of foreigners in internal repression has important symbolic and geopolitical consequences. On a symbolic level, it reinforces the perception of illegitimacy, as it reveals that the government does not fully trust its own national structures. In geopolitical terms, it projects influence beyond borders, signaling that Iranian policy is not limited to domestic territory, but relies on regional networks built over decades. This connects Iran to broader debates about Tehran's influence in conflicts in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, topics that the American public has been following in international news for years. If this topic resonates with you and helps you understand the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East, comment with the word analysis below to gauge community interest in this type of content. Alongside these internal dynamics, there is also an organized opposition outside the country, whose best-known name to the American public is Reza Pahlavi. He is the son of the last Iranian monarch, deposed by the 1979 Islamic Revolution, and has become a symbolic figure for part of the diaspora and for protesters seeking alternatives to the current model of government. Unlike armed groups or clandestine movements, Pahlavi acts primarily in the diplomatic and media fields, using interviews, videos, and speeches to influence international public opinion and engage with Iranians themselves. In his messages, he describes the scenario as a kind of internal war, where the population opposes repressive structures and demands profound reforms. He also argues that any external action should not focus on the population, but rather on the instruments of repression, an expression that encompasses armed and security forces. In demonstrations held within Iran, slogans praising the former monarchy were recorded, something that for part of the population represents a symbol of rejection of the current regime and not necessarily a literal defense of monarchical restoration. From a geopolitical point of view, the existence of a relatively unified opposition figure can influence how the United States and Europe structure their analyses of a possible transition scenario. In the international arena, actors who present legitimacy or public recognition can accelerate negotiations, stimulate dialogue, or facilitate diplomatic processes in the post-crisis period. For the American public, this aspect matters because the United States' stance towards regimes in transition usually takes into account not only strategic interests, but also possible political alternatives that can guarantee regional stability and predictable relations. While all this is happening, Europe is reacting in a heterogeneous way. In some national parliaments and in the European Parliament, MEPs have carried out symbolic gestures such as burning images of Iranian leaders or speaking in favor of harsher measures. Among these measures are proposals to declare the Iranian regime illegitimate, classify Iranian military organizations as terrorist entities, restrict the purchase of Iranian oil, and even close embassies. These movements reflect pressure from sectors of public opinion that accuse European governments of having economically aligned themselves with Iran for decades, prioritizing energy, trade, and nuclear agreements. On the other hand, traditional European leaders are showing caution, arguing that abrupt ruptures could harm important international negotiations, such as those related to the nuclear agreement. Amid these tensions, the Iranian parliament reacted with statements that any external attack on the supreme leader would constitute a declaration of war against the Islamic world. This statement requires context. The Iranian regime sees itself as the guardian of a particular vision of Islam, but much of the Muslim world is Sunni and does not recognize the Iranian leader as the ultimate religious authority. Thus, Iranian rhetoric operates more as a deterrent tool than as a literal description of a unified Islamic coalition. Within the European Parliament itself, internal debates are arising between those who advocate limited military action to weaken repressive structures and those who argue that it is not possible to promote democracy based on external attacks. For the American public, this division is important because it indicates that Europe does not have a common strategy for Iran, oscillating between maximum pressure and diplomatic caution, which complicates predictions about the future of the region and the role of the United States in the next stages. The recent stance of the United States toward Iran has drawn the attention of analysts because it occurs at a time of accumulated tension and uncertainty about Iran's political future. For the American public, understanding this move begins with comprehending the strategic geography of the Middle East, where maritime routes, military bases, and regional alliances have shaped Washington's decisions since the post-war period. In recent months, American fighter jets have been repositioned to bases in countries near the Persian Gulf, an area that concentrates a significant portion of global oil exports and where Iran acts as one of the main centers of military and political power. These deployments aim to increase the United States' response capacity should risks arise to navigation, allied bases, or military communications. Simultaneously, a major American aircraft carrier advanced toward the Indian Ocean, an area that serves as a maritime corridor between important naval choke points, such as the Strait of Hormuz, and regions of interest in Southeast Asia and the Red Sea. The aircraft carrier sailed with its public tracking system turned off. This type of measure does not necessarily mean preparation for combat, but it is part of operational practices that make it difficult for hostile actors or curious civilians to observe positions and routes in real time. For those unfamiliar with the role of an aircraft carrier in American military doctrine, it is worth explaining that this type of ship is a mobile force projection platform that can carry fighter jets, helicopters, and defense systems. It functions as a floating airbase capable of carrying out reconnaissance, defense, or attack missions without depending on local airports. Furthermore, it plays an important symbolic role in international politics, as it signals presence and capability for action to adversaries and allies. In situations like the one occurring in Iran, analysts discuss several possible scenarios. In one scenario, the aircraft carrier could be used solely as a deterrent, meaning its mere presence would discourage regional actors from escalating violence. In another scenario, it could serve for limited military operations, such as surgical strikes against specific military targets if political authorization is granted. There is also a scenario in which the aircraft carrier would function as a kind of insurance, remaining in the region only in case of an aggravation of the internal Iranian situation or impacts that threaten freedom of navigation and the flow of global energy. For part of the Iranian opposition and some Western parliamentarians, the mere presence of American forces is seen as a possible contribution to a so-called decisive blow against the Iranian repressive apparatus, although this interpretation does not necessarily reflect the official position of the United States. If you are following this analysis and value content that helps you understand how major powers use diplomatic and military instruments to project power, comment with the word power here in the comments to strengthen engagement and reach more people interested in this topic. When we observe the Iranian situation from the perspective of other external actors, we realize that Iran is not isolated on the international stage. China appears as a relevant actor for several reasons. There are reports that planes from Chinese territory have landed at Iranian airports carrying cargo, whose exact contents remain unclear, since the governments involved rarely disclose details about the transport of sensitive military or industrial equipment. For analysts, this type of movement may indicate the supply of parts, technology, or equipment for dual use, that is, with both civilian and military applications. The difficulty in publicly verifying these cargoes arises because many countries treat this type of shipment as a state secret. On the geopolitical level, China's interest in getting closer to Iran can be explained by Beijing's desire to reduce American influence in strategic areas, as well as to guarantee access to energy and strengthen diplomatic ties in the global south. However, China also faces limitations. Beijing avoids direct military confrontations and concentrates its efforts in regions considered a priority, such as the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait. Therefore, Its support for Iran tends to be indirect, through economic cooperation, energy agreements, or diplomatic support. Besides China, there are other regional actors involved in this equation. Iran maintains relations with armed groups in countries like Iraq, Afghanistan, and Lebanon, known as proxies, an expression that refers to organizations that operate in political or military alignment with a state. Although these groups do not represent Iran in the traditional diplomatic sense, they play a relevant role in regional conflicts and contribute to expanding Iranian influence beyond its borders. This regional ecosystem creates a kind of geopolitical chess game in which Iran functions as a central node connecting to various simultaneous conflicts and negotiations. The result of this structure is an overlap of interests between major powers, such as the United States and China, and regional powers such as Iran, Israel, and the Gulf monarchies. What happens within Iran affects nuclear negotiations, Israel's defense strategies, energy flows supplying Europe and East Asia, and internal debates in the United States about how to balance democratic values and strategic interests. At this point, it becomes clear that Iran is not just a country facing domestic turmoil, but an actor embedded in a broader geopolitical dispute involving economics, security, and diplomacy. While international observers debate the role of major powers, reports emerge within Iran reinforcing the complexity of the internal situation. Even in the face of repression and deaths in previous episodes, sectors of the population show no signs of giving up. On the contrary, there are reports that discontent has evolved from fear to open hostility against the regime, especially among urban youth and workers who feel excluded from economic opportunities. In some cities, residents describe an environment similar to what foreigners would associate with the concept of martial law, with a constant presence of armed soldiers and mercenaries. These mercenaries, from other countries in the region, are reportedly being used to patrol streets and protect buildings associated with the government. In response, some civilian groups have begun marking houses and establishments linked to members of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, with the aim of identifying those who are part of the repressive structures. This tactic amplifies the climate of tension and fear as it transforms residential neighborhoods into spaces of permanent suspicion. Analysts have compared this period to the final phases of other historical regimes, using as a reference the moments preceding the French Revolution. This comparison is based on the idea that an elite resistant to reforms faces a population that is reorganizing and challenging traditional structures. However, historians make important reservations. While historical parallels can help in understanding the political climate, they are not predictive tools. Revolutions and power transitions rarely follow linear scripts and can result in rapid collapses, gradual reforms, or long negotiated transitions. Still, the interest in historical comparisons indicates that observers are trying to interpret signs coming from Iran in light of past experiences, highlighting the possibility that the country is entering a decisive phase of its history. If you find it interesting to understand how societies react in times of instability and how history can offer clues about the present, comment with the word history so we can assess how much interest this topic generates. Given all these elements, questions begin to arise about what might happen in the future and what paths will be available to Iran and the international community. One possible scenario involves the intensification of state repression and an attempt to normalize the country through fear and force. This type of approach may generate temporary relief for the government, but historically tends to create accumulated tensions that manifest themselves later. Another possible scenario involves a gradual collapse of the regime, triggered by internal defections, economic strain, and popular pressure. This hypothesis raises questions about what a post-regime Iran would look like and who would fill the power vacuum. There is also an intermediate scenario in which foreign powers would carry out limited military actions against specific targets to weaken repressive structures without engaging in large-scale conflict. This would require diplomatic coordination, clear definition of objectives, and great caution to avoid unintentional escalations. Finally, there is the scenario of multiple pressures, combining economic sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and indirect support for the political and civil opposition, without resorting to military attacks. Beyond the political and military scenarios, there is an additional challenge related to what experts call transitional justice. This concept refers to the treatment of people who participated in abuses, but who decide to leave the regime before its collapse. Countries that have undergone profound changes, such as South Africa at the end of apartheid, have had to discuss whether these individuals should be punished, pardoned, or judged on a case-by-case basis. This type of decision influences not only moral justice, but also political stability and institutional reconstruction. For the American public, this discussion matters because any position taken by Washington will impact regional allies, the security of energy routes, and the relationship between values and interests. The United States has historically alternated between policies based on defending democracy and policies focused on containing strategic rivals, and Iran is precisely at the intersection of these two logics. Understanding the Iranian situation means reflecting on the extent to which the United States should support democratic change, avoid military escalation, or prioritize energy stability. These issues will remain present in the American public debate and will have concrete effects in the coming decades, especially in a world where major powers are vying for influence on multiple continents simultaneously. Iranian instability shows how domestic politics, energy, and alliances shape the global landscape. Nothing is set in stone, and the coming months could alter the balance of power in the Middle East. If this topic helps you understand the world, please like, subscribe to the channel, and if you've watched until the end, leave a comment. I'm paying attention. And get ready. In the next video on screen, we're going to analyze: why haven't the US attacked Iran yet? Is European security at risk? I'll see you there.